Thanks for staying with us. A very good evening to you. If you've just tuned in, this is News at Prime. I'm Mposatole. And our Minister of Trade and Industry, Ebrahim Patel, delivered his budget vote earlier today. He outlined the progress made by government as the economy is recovering from the Covid-19 pandemic. But with the July 2021 unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng, the war in Ukraine and the floods in KZN, all that has surely dented business confidence and disrupted supply chains. Minister Patel joins us now to talk more about this. Minister, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. As you delivered the budget, there were some highs and lows. Let's talk about some of the highlights.
Good evening, Paul, and good to be on the show. I think let me start with saying that in the budget speech today, we sketched the outline of where the economy is at, some positives and some green shoots. We had 4.9% growth in the economy last year after a really rough 2020. And some of our performance picked up also. We had the best export effort to date. Even our manufacturing exports have shown an uptick. Exports to the rest of the continent has also looked good. And so that is cause for optimism. But at the same time, there are two sets of challenges that we outlined. And then I gave examples of some really good gains that we've made. And so the challenges that we face, you've alluded to these shocks to the system, the July Unrest, the floods in KZN, the war in Ukraine. What they are doing, they're feeding into something that's happening globally. That the risks inherent in economic performance is becoming more clear now. Whether you're in Europe or in Asia, you're affected by the disruptions in supply chains. Geopolitical tensions are rising. It's not just Russia, Ukraine. It's also the United States and China. And so we are preparing really for a very different world, a world that has changed and that is changing fundamentally. In that world, there are real dangers for South Africa, but there's also big opportunities. When I speak to chief executive officers of large multinational corporations, they now say they need to de-risk their supply chain. They need to make sure that they don't put all their eggs in the proverbial single basket. That represents an opportunity for South Africa because sourcing will begin to move away from Asia or any concentrated market, and we can position ourselves well for that. There are other risks that's coming. Companies are embracing the need to make themselves more capable of addressing climate change. For example, in the European Union and in the United Kingdom, they've announced that they will, from 2030 and 2035, no longer permit new vehicles that use the internal combustion engines to be sold there. South Africa is a very big exporter of cars and bakkies and trucks and so on to Europe. So we've got to reorganize our own production to deal with those risks and to find opportunity in those risks. So it's about embracing the upside of change and reducing the downside of change. And I'll give an example of it, perhaps to wrap this part up. And that is, when COVID hit our shores, we found that we were without ventilators. We had no capacity to manufacture vaccines. We had shortages even of health standard face masks. By using the capability of the South African private sector and working in partnership with government, we were able to design our own ventilator and produce 20,000 units that were used in hospitals. We were able to help companies to upgrade their production of healthcare face masks. So doctors no longer have to worry that they're going to run short of masks in surgery and in theater. And most importantly, we were able to address the vaccine challenge. We're now producing Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And from October this year, Pfizer vaccines will also be made here in South Africa. And even better, we're developing, from early next year, we're running a human trial on the first African mRNA technology vaccine that has been reverse engineered here in South Africa by a South African company using the most advanced technologies. And so that is really about addressing the risks inherent in the global economy and in the local economy. More prosaically, I guess, with the July Unrest, we needed to reinvent the way in which government works. We're slow, we're bureaucratic, we're cumbersome, we're onerous in our procedures. And you can't do that when factories are burned and people stare economic ruin in the face. So the agencies of government, in my case, the agencies of the DTIC, had to find a more expeditious, a speedier way to deal with applications for support. Sometimes, in those instances, a factory got burned down, all of its records are gone. Its financial records has gone up in smoke. And how do you begin to put an application in under those circumstances? That required the state to be more agile, more responsive, more able to work with businesses. Many sugar farmers, small-scale sugar farmers, had their fields burned. Everything that they had worked for was lost. We could step in and assist and help them with some basic seed funding that allowed them to get back on their feet. That's what we need to do much more about. And that was the theme of the budget speech today.
Minister, as you speak about, the big changes, a world that's constantly now changing and also recovering economy from COVID-19, your aim is to unlock at least 120 million rand in the private industry. What will that essentially look like as you begin to rope up this money?
So, Paul, let me start by saying that we're setting our goal even higher. We're aiming for 120 billion rand in fresh investment pledges and commitments that we want from the private sector. Now, the way we get that is creating a more conducive environment. That means you've got to have a little bit more stability on your energy supply, your transport logistics systems need to work. Government must also bring its part to that. And what we want out of that is that factory production must be expanded, new shafts must be sunk in mines, new shops and distribution centers built, new ICT units, whether it's those centers that support cloud computing or some of the e-commerce platforms. It's about investment where jobs are created, where ordinary South Africans can find jobs, but whereas also where young entrepreneurs can find opportunities to be suppliers to these larger businesses. And that's what the 120 billion rand of fresh investment that we're seeking from companies will be doing. We've had some success. When the President closed the 4th South African Investment Conference in March this year in Sandton, you may recall, and listeners can recall, that the total pledges over this last 4 years was 1.1 trillion rand. That is 95% of the target we set ourselves 5 years ago. We've got 1 more year to go. If we reach this 120 billion, we would just slightly exceed the target the President has set us. So it's really all hands on deck, really working hard. And the working hard is sorting out the problems at municipal level that restricts companies from being able to grow their business or set up new factories, working with other national departments to see how we can jointly unlock what needs to be done. And of course, some of the policy announcements by the President have been critical in driving the new appetite that we see among investors for South Africa.
As you make mention, Minister Patel, of energy and logistics being vital to the industrialization and the success of industrialization, as you and I speak, some experts have warned that consumers should expect stage 8 blackouts. Will that not now be perhaps a reversal of the efforts that you're trying to put in place? You do make mention that government must also bring its part, but the energy situation in South Africa is a serious concern.
There's no question about it, Mpho. If we don't find ways to stabilize the energy supply, we are not going to be able to get deeper levels of investment in our economy and higher levels of industrialization, which is really about South Africans making more things, selling more things here, and generating more jobs here. So to address that, Minister Pravin Gordhan, who's the reporting minister Eskom and Transnet met with me, and we've agreed we're going to set up a forum now, a forum in which Eskom and Transnet comes and meets together with strategic industrialists. It could be in the car sector, in the steel sector, in the food sector, in different sectors of the economy. And we're going to look at partnerships. What can we do together to be able to stabilize the energy grid and improve the transport logistics? Let me give you an example. I met with a company called Air Liquide. It's a French company, and they work with Sasol. And they've now decided that they're going to be building these renewable energy plants that would be able to generate 600 megawatts of renewable energy. Now, that's a considerable quantity of renewable energy coming off that project. Some of the mines have said they would be able to do up to 100 million megawatts based on the announcement by the president last year. As we get more of these private sector initiatives underway, we achieve two things. The one is they pay for it. So the pressure on the fiscus and on the public balance sheet is reduced. And the second thing is they can feed that energy, or the energy that they don't use, they can feed it into the grid. Eskom can buy that energy and ensure in that way that it has a more secure supply, so that if a unit goes offline, it doesn't have to put the entire system into shock, as is the case now. We're living as it is, hand to mouth, as they say, that the energy supply on a good day is just sufficient. And when any of these big coal-fired power stations hit a problem and they need to be repaired, or there's a maintenance challenge or so on, then the entire system shudders. We've got to get out of that. And there's a lot of ingenuity, capability, and capital in the private sector that we can work with. We've also met with the trade unions. They sit on the boards of the big pension funds to say there can be a decent return because pension monies also have to be protected. But we can begin to look long-term by using public and private and social capital to rebuild our energy system. That's the commitment that government is now getting into, so that we're able to supply that secure energy. Besides businesses being badly affected, ordinary South Africans are also really affected each time there's load shedding. We've got to stop what we're doing. We've got to scale down, and that means our economic activities, but also the quality of our life decreases. And for that reason, this joint initiative by Minister Gordon and ourselves, where we can also make its contribution. And then there's the question of theft of copper cable from the public infrastructure. People, for short-term financial gain, go out there, they cut the cable, it plunges a town or a city or a hospital or another area into darkness. And so we're going to deal with the scrap metal and copper cable theft. There's a discussion going on within government now in response to the president's call in Sona that we must deal with this matter. And in due course, we're going to be coming out with a set of measures after it's been finalized in government.
Now, ratings agencies delivered an inflation warning for South Africa about 2 weeks ago. We are also set to be hearing an outlook from them. What is your take around that, as it really doesn't spell to the optimism that we would expect as the COVID-19 pandemic and the economy is starting to open up a bit?
So first, on the rating agencies, over the last, 6 months or so, we've seen a relatively welcome move where we've been upgraded to stable from negative, which means that while our fundamental rating hasn't been changed, they saw an improvement in the conditions, particularly in the fiscal outlook. What we now need to deal with is the concerns about the future. And all ratings is really about a guess, a punt on the future, because your rating as a country, what they call the sovereign rating, determines your cost of borrowing, because it's a message to creditors about your ability to pay back your debt within the time that you've undertaken to do so. So it's in South Africa's interest to get a good credit rating. At the moment, inflationary pressures are coming right across the world. The big issue in the United States that viewers would have noticed when reading online the commentary coming from United States economists. Their single biggest concern right now is inflation. Inflation has been going up in Europe, and inflation, of course, is fueled in part by the rising petrol prices, but also the disruption in supply chains. The price of wheat has shot up as a result of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat to the world, but even cooking oil, as many of the viewers who take responsibility for cooking and for buying cooking oil in the supermarket will attest to. That's happening globally. And because we buy quite a bit of our product globally, we're not insulated from what happens there. And that is one source of potential inflationary pressure. And so what the rating agencies will be looking at is, given that shock to our system, will it affect our ability to grow our economy? Because the growth of the economy determines the amount of taxes government collects, and those taxes determine whether we can pay the debts that we undertake. So there's that careful balance between these things. And of course, Standard & Poor, Moody's, and Fitch, they regularly review. We tend not to say anything about this until a decision is made by rating agencies, because they take a range of information into account. They'll talk to government, they'll talk to the private sector, they will look at the fiscal balance sheet and make a determination. And from South Africa's point of view, we can point to some fundamentals we're getting right, but we can also accept and acknowledge that in some areas, like energy as an example, we're not quite there yet. We need to do a lot
Minister,
more.
We're going to have to leave it there for the sake of time. Thank you for your time, Minister Ebrahim Patel.